with the climate negotiations there, we have been engaging from as far back as 2010, and have always looked at issues, for example, the controversies and the issues, for example, of the Paris Agreement. We have very well-trained resource people in Kenya. If you look at, for example, the major international bodies, the UN, Kenyans who work there are well trained. The human race has survived for hundreds of years, feeding ourselves. The challenges have been the things that we have introduced. Food that we consume here in Kenya, for example, is contaminated and it's seen to be okay. But when you take it to the airport, it is tested and you're told bring it, we are rejecting it. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so we have begun the journey and we hope to finish the journey stronger as Kenya. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Maina, and I'm the National Coordinator for the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, BIBA Kenya, which is a network of 47 member organizations working on issues of biodiversity conservation and biosafety. I've been at this for almost the last 20 years, worked with various networks in Africa, including the likes of PELAM, which is Participatory Ecological Land Use Management, where I worked as a regional advocacy officer based in Lusaka, Zambia, for about 4 years. I've also worked with the African Biodiversity Network, also doing advocacy and communications. And now I'm with the BIBA Kenya, the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. My background is interesting. When I started off, my first degree is in economics and sociology. But when I got into the development world, I was introduced into a lot of agriculture issues and advocacy. And so we began working on various issues like the campaign against the genetically engineered crops. Some few years back, there was a huge campaign to introduce biofuels in Kenya and in Africa, and some of the crops targeted were the likes of maize, which we really raised a lot of questions of. We are not even maize sufficient in Kenya, yet we were thinking of biofuels. There was also jatropha, which was said to be the new crop in eastern part of country, the drier parts of the country. But unfortunately, the research we did, we found that jatropha thrives in good soils and good rains and sufficient rains. And so with time we were proven that jatropha cannot be the new cash crop in the eastern part of the country. So I'm currently pursuing my master's in environmental education, particularly targeting issues of climate change, because I'm also a trained negotiator, not only on climate change issues but also on trade issues. I've been trained as a negotiator by the government of Kenya on trade when we had the negotiations of the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries negotiating with the European Union for a trade agreement. Currently we're also looking at the trade agreement between Kenya and the US, the STIP. But also with the climate negotiations there, we have been engaging from as far back as 2010, and have always looked at issues, for example, the controversies and the issues, for example, of the Paris Agreement. We now have major issues related to carbon markets, which we have questioned about who benefits from these carbon markets. How are the farmers benefiting? Apart from sequestering the carbon, you see the resources going to the farmers are very limited. And so I once was asked, am I an activist or an advocate? I think I am both. We have been doing advocacy and lobbying for many years, and of course part of that is activism, and it has really been a very interesting time, and I say I enjoy doing what I'm doing because it has to have passion for you to do some of the things that we do, raising your voices against government, against regional blocs, COMESA, the AU, and this is something that I really enjoy doing. We have very well trained resource people in Kenya. If you look at, for example, the major international bodies, the UN, Kenyans who work there are well trained. Even in the country, our major challenge is corruption. When you go to such negotiations, we need to go when we are very objective, but unfortunately our leaders quite often are compromised. Like if you look at the negotiations we had on the EU ACP, European Union and the Africa, Caribbean and Pacific, there are even issues that were brought in there that you can see clearly this one is meant to ensure that we are always going round in circles. For example, there was a clause that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So like if you agree on one thing and the rest you don't agree, so nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So all these years, I think I heard the other day that recently there was a bilateral signing, but as the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries, it was very difficult to get that because there are always people there who will go around you, and we end up getting the shorter end of the stick, because at the end of the day, you see African countries and negotiators also at a disadvantage. When you'd go for those negotiations, it's the European Union who would pay flights, accommodation, if it's DSA or PADMs, and so at the end of the day, the compromises are high. Most of the countries would not afford to maybe pay those costs, and that's why you see there's challenges we see as African countries. The moment we'll be able to get rid of a corruption and believe in ourselves and avoid this kind of carrot and stick negotiations or running after the small monies, then that's when we'll be able to develop and achieve much more as African countries. But where we are at is we've really tried, but corruption and also you would blame even the European countries, or look at China. They are also part of the problems because they will bribe to get a contract to build a road. And so both the person who gives and the person who takes are to blame. If you look at a few years back, when you look, for example, at our environment around Mount Kenya, there's a lot that we have lost over the years in terms of species, plant and animal species. As you know, like in Africa, the Congo Basin is one of the biggest absorbers of carbon. Professor Wangari Maathai, who had the privilege to meet when she was alive, fought for Karura Forest because it's the lungs of Nairobi. And so when we are diverse, we're able to, even as human beings, we're able to get the best from what we need. Because, for example, if you look like at our seed systems, when you diversify and you are planting, for example, the smallholder farmer in the village, and they are planting maize, beans, pumpkin, cassava. When they diversify, if the rains fail, at least they will get something and the soil is covered. But when you look at the industrial system that is pushed, you're finding that you're talking of monocultures, and the agriculture economics, when went to school, or those who are trained, they're trained that you thrive through monocultures. So you plant maize, and previously we would see that diversification really helped to support. And so we are pushing for a move towards more bringing back those lost species, especially the plants, which are very important in our food systems. We see the face of God in the biodiverse systems that we have all over the world. If you go to Australia, you see the kangaroo. If you come to Africa, you see the big five in Kenya. So in everything that we have, even in our forests, the diversity in the seeds and the food systems and the plants, the tree species, is an indication of God built all this for our benefit. If you look, for example, at a tree like the Prunus africana, many people are rushing for it because it has been shown that when it supports or it helps in managing or preventing some of the diseases that we are seeing, like the cancers.
Kenya is now 60 years old, and we are still walking around with a begging bowl. Yet Kenya is endowed with very good land. As a matter of fact, even the so-called desert in northern Kenya is not really a desert, because we have seen people with desert, with deserts, real deserts, being able to become food self-sufficient. So, what is what is it that makes it possible for us to be food self-sufficient?
One, let's start with corruption. If you look at even the policies that we have in Kenya, even at independence, some of those policies are very brilliant, but we prepare them and keep them on the shelves.
Like which one? Which policy would you say is brilliant?
Like is it session of paper number 10? Some of those were even adapted by countries that were behind us, like the Singapores, and now they are almost first world countries. And when you look at, for example, corruption is a major challenge. When you hear now that there is a corruption because of fertilizer, this has been happening from the 60s, the 70s, because people are always looking for money to siphon. We have for a long time said that we need to have, before even farmers are brought for these subsidized fertilizers, they need to test the soils to be able to determine what exactly is required. We don't need all this DAP all the time. Our soils need even sometimes just even lime to make them reduce the acidity. But at the end of the day, the policymakers give good recommendations, but the implementers, our politicians, they are busy trying to gain from the pocket, from the public coffers through corruption, and that has really affected even our agriculture. When you look at, for example, the subsidies, they are benefiting from bringing the fertilizers at exorbitant prices because they are in for the deals, and that's the biggest problem. But also, the push for an industrial agriculture or industrial revolution in Kenya is very much ill-informed, because when you look at in the recent years with the rising cost of synthetic fertilizers and other farm inputs, farmers are now resorting to, for example, using their local resources, production of biofertilizers and biopesticides, and we can see the successes. But at the end of the day, is government putting even money into research? If you look at our local research organizations like the Kenya Agriculture and Livestock Research Organization, the researchers are there, but they're not getting the funding to do the research. So they end up accepting research from interested multinationals who are keen to push their agenda. At the end of the day, he who is paying the piper is calling the tune. So the research is more inclined to opening up markets for corporates and multinational corporations, because they are funding research and introducing even their, for example, species like genetically engineered crops through our research organizations. And so you can see the multiple facets in there that are affecting our food system. If only the government would put in money, for example, we are currently working on a national agroecology strategy in Kenya under the Intersectoral Forum on Agrobiodiversity and Agroecology. And in it, if government is behind the policy, because ISFA is located at Kilimo, the Ministry of Agriculture, but we need also the government to put money into with the researchers to test and prove that agroecology can feed us. We are doing it as civil society on a small scale with our farmers producing biofertilizers, biopesticides, and we are seeing success. But government needs to put more money, more effort to be able to support such processes. The money that we are really interested in running after is picking loans for major infrastructure, because the politicians will get kickbacks. not much money is put even into agriculture. If you look, for example, at Malabo, the Malabo Declaration, African countries committed to increase at least 10% of their budgetary allocations to agriculture. But the countries that, some of the countries, I think only Rwanda has been able to achieve that. The progress that you see, for example, in Kenya, unfortunately ends up in issues like raising salaries, not even hiring extension officers. If you go to most of the counties in Kenya, extension officers are approaching retirement age. When they retire, they're not being hired. And you know, having growing up, the role of the extension officer was very important to support farmers. The effect has been that the multinational corporations have put in now money into the agro dealership and resources there. We are seeing people they are calling village-based advisors. They are not trained, and a farmer is desperate, goes to the agro dealer, says my crop is being attacked by this. The agro dealer is not a professional. They recommend as they are instructed by the companies that are supplying. At the end of the day, there's overuse of the pesticides, the toxic pesticides, and this is having an effect. One of our members and partners, Kenya Organic Agriculture Network, did a research. They've been doing research regularly. And if you go to places like Kirinyaga and Muranga, the amount of pesticides that are used on crops is so high. KEFIS one time was looking at or monitoring, and it was very shocking because even at the end of the day, when some of these horticultural products are produced and taken to the airport for export, the MRL levels are so high, they are rejected. But when they are rejected, they find their way into our local markets. So we are very strict on what we are selling out there, but what we are consuming here is very contaminated. The capacity of KEFIS is limited in terms of monitoring. The capacity of the regulator, the Pest Control and Products Board, is also limited. And so that becomes a big challenge, and they are overwhelmed. But also, the research that should be going on there is still paid for by multinationals or corporates. And so you can see their voice is almost muffled.
So what you're saying is that we are underfunding research, and at the same time, we are underfunding the regulatory agencies.
Exactly.
So what kind of product or byproduct can we expect from that kind of scenario?
Then you will end up with products that are not safe, unsafe food with high residue levels. You're ending up with farmers very desperate, using all these kind of toxic pesticides. It's very interesting, for example, if you look, for example, at an ingredient like glyphosate, which is a weed killer, a herbicide. The farmers are even using that to dry their crop, not only maize, wheat, onions, tomatoes. So much contamination going on. It's ending up in the cities, and you can even see the upsurge and the incidences of cancer and other non-communicable diseases that is really becoming a major challenge in the country. And a lot of this you see is causing a huge medical bill because we are not taking care of what we are eating. Food security speaks of a system or situation where you have access to food, any kind of food. For example, even for, let's say, a refugee who's in Kakuma, they can have maize, but culturally maybe that is not their meal. When you talk to food sovereignty, it goes beyond the access to food. It brings aspects of choice. You have a choice. You can eat fish today, you can eat beef tomorrow, you can eat chicken, you can eat all kind of vegetables. It's also culturally appropriate, and you decide the system at which you produce this kind of foods. So for us, what we push for is food sovereignty, because it goes beyond just having maybe food aid or food that you cannot afford a diversity or what is culturally appropriate for you.
You see, in where I come from, the eating of fish, for instance, was frowned upon. And a self-respecting adult Kikuyu male would not be caught eating fish, you know. So is that what you mean by cultural appropriateness?
Yes, of course. When you look at, for example, research that has been done, and now you know I'm sure you eat fish because you know the nutritional value now. Even an adult Maasai man would not be caught eating birds, which is chicken. But now you're finding a situation where people are realizing the nutritional aspect that is allowable. But if you look, for example, at a Muslim who is not allowed by their religion to eat pork, and because there's hunger, you tell them you have to eat pork, then that is not food sovereignty. You have a choice. Even as yourself, if you feel you cannot eat fish, that is your choice. The Kenya Seed Company is no longer as vibrant as it was and is not able to produce. Part of it, like I talked about, is what you've said, liberalization. There's also aspects of where multinationals, which are very well endowed in terms of financial muscle, have come in and brought in their different varieties, mostly that they are supplying now. Kenya Seed, lacking government support and even losing some of its land through corruption, where they would do the research and multiply the seed, it becomes very difficult. And like I told you, even government, because of challenges of financial resources, is not even hiring. So you're seeing a situation not only in Kenya, in most of the other countries. If you go to Zambia, the main company used to be Zambia Seed, which would produce seed for the local market, which was doing very well in the country. But right now, multinationals have come in, and you're seeing a conglomeration of major seed companies in the world now controlling the seed market. So these companies want to control, and you know, once you control the seed, you're able to control the food. And that is one statement that was made by one company in 1960s, that we need to control the food systems. And once to control the food systems is to control the seed. And so you're finding a situation, there is even the cost of seed has gone up, because once you start packaging, these companies are after profits and royalties, and so that's a major challenge. One of the things that we are doing as a Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, we have been chairing for the last 2 years the Indigenous Seed and Food Culture Harvest Fair. And we have done the last two, 2022-2023, at the National Museums of Kenya. And there we have been promoting local, bringing farmers with their local varieties. This year, I'm just coming yesterday from the third Indigenous Food and Food Culture Harvest Fair, where we were in Kisumu at the Nyando Seed Bank, and farmers from all over Kenya went there. We were there with them, and they were showcasing what they are doing. Apart from the seed, the farmers are taught how to do breeding, because if you look at our laws, they don't recognize a farmer as a breeder. And the farmers are, for decades, for example, in Kenya, feeders. Your mother never used to go to the shop to buy seed. They would know how to identify the first seed that shoots, the first maize seed that shoots, the one that flowers first, the one that tassels first, and they're able to identify that as seed and keep it for the next season. But now, in 2010, we had the Seed Act, which came up with the very strict guidelines or laws that farmers are not breeders. In Kenya, it's either formal or informal. Unfortunately, 80% of the seed falls under informal, which is a very derogatory term. We are now calling it farmer managed seed system. And so when you look at it's only maize that mostly is what they are calling the formal seed system, you find that farmers were reaching a point they are not able to access their seed. We are promoting the building of community seed learning centers. But also that, if you look at it strictly in the law, a farmer is said not to have seed. A farmer has grain. And so that becomes a challenge. We as Biba Kenya, we together with Greenpeace Africa and Seed Savers Network have gone to court, to Machakos Law Court, where we are seeking a constitutional interpretation of our seed law, because our seed law does not recognize the indigenous seeds or the farm managed seed systems. But our Constitution 2010 is very clear. We are protecting every Kenyan, our seed, our indigenous cultural system, they are protected. We are hoping to have a determination before the end of the year of that case, because we want that to be interpreted. But what has happened, because of the pressure we have been putting over the years, the Ministry of Agriculture, the policy department, has begun processes where they are reviewing the access and benefit sharing regulations, which are part of the laws. There is also a process to review the SEED Act, but we are calling for more involvement and participation of civil society to be able to do that. So at least there's the listening, but we need to put much more effort to ensure that we protect our farmers. But even apart from protecting them, what I'm talking about, the seed fairs, the festivals, are very important in reviving them. Some of them, the issue builds up from the farmers. For example, in Busia County, as far back as the early 2000s, we have a group of women farmers who were mostly dealing with either people who are infected or affected by HIV. And so those who began taking ARVs, they were like, we have to feed ourselves well because we are taking very strong medicine. And so they started bringing back their traditional vegetables, bringing back the millets, the sorghum. And now they are producing so much, we have built a community seed bank there. They are supplying local schools in Busia with millet and sorghum. So the children are taking very nutritious uji as opposed to just maize. And this is is a shining case of how things can come out from the women. And they're saying now we need to eat well, because if you're taking care of someone who's sick, then you have to feed them well. And so those are very, we have been sharing those cases, and they're bringing a change even within our government, that it is important that we protect our farm managed seed systems.
I cannot fail to ask you about the ongoing attempts to regulate farming further. Mm-hmm. I've seen bills that seek to bar people from growing anything without a license, including crops like dengue. Mm-hmm. You can imagine, you are barred from captivating or even exchanging seeds. Mm-hmm. And then on the livestock sector, people there's an attempt to bar people from selling milk to their neighbors. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So if you look at that in the context of food self-sufficiency as a country, where are we headed?
I think we're headed in the wrong direction, because you're going to reach a point where the smallholder farmer, and many of the farmers in Kenya are smallholder farmer, they would not afford to get a license to keep a cow, a license to keep chicken, a license to grow green grams, a license to sell your milk at the roadside, or take it to your neighbor if you have neighbors and you're supplying them. That is very wrong. It's a wrong trend that we are seeing. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it is driven up with the issue of government making money from these licenses and all that. But it may be a deterrent to our farmers. They will stop producing. And the cost of production in Kenya is still quite high. If you can see, eggs come from Uganda, and they are cheaper here because our cost of living is higher. The cost of importing the feeds and the components of the feed is higher. So it may negatively or reverse our gains. Already we are net food importers, but people might just abandon agriculture, because if I have my cow and I can supply 5 people in my village with milk and make some money, why do I need a license for that? It is wrong. The human race has survived for hundreds of years, feeding ourselves. The challenges have been the things that we have introduced. A lot of these, for example, toxic pesticides are products, or they're produced from materials that was kept in after the World War II. So it's looking for markets and looking for profit. Technology is very good because it helps us in innovation. It makes our life easier. Maybe 100 years ago, we didn't have many cars, but now you can move 100 kilometers in an hour because of technology. What we promote for us is technology that benefits us, but not technology driven by greed or profit. when you look at some of the philanthropies that are promoting some of these technologies, or the companies, for example, genetic engineering, it's about capturing the seed market and controlling the food chain. And so you find that GMOs is not about food security. GMOs is about creating dependency, so that I will go to the agro dealer every season to buy seed, which is to their profit. This seed is linked, if it's genetically engineered, I have a spraying schedule, so I'm using the pesticide. I have a fertilizer schedule, I'm using their products. And so it is all hinged in pushing profit driven. And that's a major challenge and an issue that we have raised. But also the impact on the health of the population by the use of these toxic pesticides and the synthetic fertilizers has been questioned by several scientists on the impact it's having on our health. You can see the increasing cases of non-communicable diseases and other diseases that were not there before. If you look at the environment, GMOs thrived in monocultures, so that you plant in straight lines and you spray what needs to be sprayed, you kill all the weeds, and you leave your maize standing, if you're looking, for example, at Roundup ready crops. These are a major challenge. If you look, for example, in Kenya, Kenya has one crop that has been introduced, BT cotton. BT cotton was pushed and said it's just for fabric, but only 40% goes into production of fabric. 60% is cotton seed oil, cotton seed cake for animal feed, and straw. So the 60% is higher. The impact, you see it on the environment, because you're growing in monocultures and you need huge tracts of land to grow that. Our smallholder farmers have very small pieces, 1 to 2 acres. For you to avoid cross-pollination, you need to have a 5-meter refugia around your farm. How many can afford to do that as smallholder farmers? And so those are some of the major concerns. They cannot coexist with the local varieties. And so if we introduce, for example, GMO maize in Kenya, and smallholders start growing it, and I as a neighbors decide to keep my indigenous, there will be cross-pollination. And that's a major issue, and we lose our local diversity. When you look at, for example, seed systems, many of the developed countries are trying to go back to local varieties. They are local varieties. They are trying to go organic, and organic foods in the West is very expensive. Here we still have the opportunity to build our organic food systems through practicing agroecology, to avoid getting into the trap of having to consume genetically engineered crops. Genetic engineering is a product of modern biotechnology, and traditionally GMOs were developed in the laboratories, for example, using a gene gun, and often they would cross the species barrier. So one of the first GMOs that was developed was a tomato that was inserted with a gene of a fish, so that the tomato can do well in colder climates. You know, tomatoes prefer more warmer temperatures, but it was inserted with a gene of a fish which was living deep in the sea, so that it can withstand the colder climates. And so one of the major controversies about GMOs is that they cross the species barrier. So you do not reproduce in the traditional sexual, where male and female mate and you produce. But this one you can even mix, for example, a gene from the pig to the maize to produce maybe a particular trait you want. One of the issues that has been raised with the scientists is that as you do the genetic modification, you're never sure of how the genes interact in there. And for example, if you look at children who are born with cerebral palsy, it's only one gene that changes, and it causes all these challenges that you see. But now we're having modern other type, the new biotechnologies, gene editing. You're having synthetic biology. This one, even you don't need to even cross species. You pick the genome code from this and this, and you mix them and you produce. So you're seeing, like, for example, products like vanilla flavor. You don't have to produce vanilla to do that. You can do it in the laboratory. You're seeing a situation, for example, one of the products of gene editing was in China, where 2 HIV positive parents, their genes were extracted, they removed the HIV virus, and the children born were HIV negative. A lot of issues were raised about that we even playing God, the ethical issues, and the issue was really hashed down. And so that controversy of we want to do this, but the scientists question, even because you see, like for example, when you do in the laboratory the trials for the rats, it only takes about 90 days. One of the most controversial scientists that did a 2-year trials on rats, Professor Jill Seralini, he found out that the rats developed tumors. They were tumors. So tumor could be a sign of cancer when he tested for the 2 years. And so you see, it's not very strict in terms of how long. For example, if it's a human medicine, before it's introduced in the market, it takes about 8 years to check on the impact, what could be the effects. But for rats, it's like, for GMOs, it was like 90 days. So Professor Seralini did 2 years, and he saw that the rats that were fed on GMO maize and soya developed tumors. And that has been very controversial, because even the journal that produced that report, it really faced a lot of challenges, to the effect the editor was fired and they had to retract the study. But he went ahead and did another study, the same study, and it was republished. And maybe you can look at some of the double standards, because most of the GMOs, and the biggest target is maize, because maize is a staple in Africa, at least sub-Saharan Africa. And you'd have to question yourself, why is there no GMO wheat, which is more consumed in the West? So that is an issue that also we raise, because what is this keen interest in GMO maize? Because wheat we've never seen any study done on that. Through our campaigning over the years, they decided now to go for the the lower fruits, which was like cotton, BT cotton, and others. But the ultimate prize would be maize, because it's consumed in sub-Saharan Africa by almost everyone. Everyone talks of ugali, sima, sadza. They eat it every day. And so, like I tell you, it's a double standard, and you can see the keen interest on maize. It looks very interesting, because we are making our food a product of technology. There's so many research organizations. Those that you might see are thriving are getting the funding from the interested parties, the multinationals, to drive the research. But if you look at the developed world, there's a lot of focus on research. They put in money into research. But for us, that's not a priority here. If you look, for example, at the White House in the US, and US is one of the countries that adopted GMOs, I think 96, 97, one of the first countries. The White House has an organic garden where they grow and eat organic. During the Obama times, he was very particular about that. When you look at, for example, genetic engineering, there are many issues that we have raised about them. The safety, the fact that they are very intertwined with the use of toxic pesticides and agrochemicals. It's an industry. You look at who owns the companies that are selling and producing the genetically engineered seeds. Is the techs. Food has become a technology issue through philanthropy. So you give with one hand as philanthropy, but you're funding the research that is going to where you are shareholder in some of those companies. And of course, the issues of you find that those who raise their voice, even the scientists against GMOs, really face a lot of backlash, and not only in Kenya, because in Kenya it's not even much. Even in Europe, some like Professor Jill Seralini in France has been shunned and been called names as doing bad research, because at the end of the day, those who want to benefit are more keen for them to get the money. There's money in being seen to need to promote GMOs. In Kenya, We have the Biosafety Act that was signed in 2009 and established the National Biosafety Authority. When you look at our National Biosafety Authority, it has less than 20 technical staff that can do analysis, look at some of the applications that are made, check. And so it's very difficult for them to even monitor. There have even been cases where GMOs have been brought into the country illegally, like in 2008. We did random samples. We bought imported sausages from in supermarket. We bought seed, particularly a sample we bought in Eldoret that was marked hybrid. When we did simple tests, ELISA, we realized they look suspicious. So we worked with Greenpeace and took them to Germany for confirmatory tests. And true to it, the imported sausages that had soya were GMO contaminated. There was baby food also that had soya, that had GMO, and the seed that we bought in Eldoret was GMO contaminated. And so if we could have that as far back as 2008, what is going on in this country? You should look at issues of food safety. KEFIS does regular monitoring. In fact, in 2019, my organization BIBA Kenya, together with the Kenya Organic Agriculture Network, Root to Food Initiative, and Resources Oriented Development Initiative, did a rapid research or desktop research on the pesticides that we are using in Kenya, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that are banned in Europe. And we found 8 ingredients, and the products are over 300 that are banned in Europe because of challenges related to some of them being carcinogenic, causing issues of endocrine disruption, infertility, killing of pollinators, and they are still in use in Kenya. So we took a petition to the Health Committee in Parliament that was then chaired by Honorable Sabina Chege, and asked that the Kenyan government should work. We are calling on the regulator, the Pest Control and Products Board, to withdraw these products from the Kenyan market. There was a lot of hullabaloo, industry saying through the Agrochemical Association of Kenya that in Kenya we cannot grow crops without these chemicals, and agrochemicals, they are very important. But at the end of the day, we showed proof. The research had been done in Europe where they have banned. But also there was double standards, because Europe is the one sending the products to Africa, but for them they don't want. In fact, they do 100% testing for products that are going back to their country that we have not exceeded the residue levels that they require. And so you're seeing a lot of double standards. At the end of the day, what is good for Europe is not good for us, because we need to ensure that we protect our communities from these products. GMOs are very much intertwined. They work in harmony with these toxic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, and that is a major issue that we are raising in terms of the health impact, the environmental impact, the economic impact. Will farmers be able to afford? Look now, farmers cannot afford fertilizers, but if you put more effort in producing biofertilizers, biopesticides, farmers can be able to manage and produce for food sufficiency and health. Food that we consume here in Kenya, for example, is contaminated and it's seen to be okay. But when you take it to the airport, it is tested and you're told bring it, we are rejecting it. Unfortunately, KEFIS does not monitor that. It ends up here in the market in Githurai, or if it's French beans, in Marigiti, and we are eating it. So if it is bad for Europe, is it good for Africa? I think food should be the first thing we protect, because if you look at countries like the US, they like have 5-year reserves of food in their food banks. And food is very important, because if people don't have food, then they're angry and can do anything. I think every researcher in Kenya has to get a permit from the National Research NACOSTI. And so one of the interesting things is that before Even NACOSTI's capacity to follow up, if you took up a license to pick 400 samples of this species and do the research, the follow-up can be a struggle because there are not enough staff to follow that, the budget, in terms of budget. But now what is happening, when some of the research became a bit controversial, you not see the Chinese or the foreign researcher going to get the permit. They either come with and give money to local students to collect the research, the data for them. And now we have gene editing. They don't even have to carry the samples. They just profile it, the gene editing, and they go and store it and can reproduce it. And so there's also a lot of piracy going on of our resources, and we need to be very keen in terms of protecting. It all boils down, how much are we putting into research, how much are we putting in our research institutions, our regulators, so that we're able to regulate what is happening in the country. There's the controversial one of Lake Baringo. Is it Baringo, Bogoria? Where there was a Kenyan researcher for his master's thesis identified enzymes that can be used. For example, you remember the stonewash genes?
Yes.
They look like faded, but they're not faded. So this enzyme, he when he compiled his research, it was free available. So this company came from Europe and came and saw the research and were able to go to Lake Bogoria, pick the enzyme. They have gone back and they are now producing the genes and making billions. I think there was a case about paying for the resources, and I think communities were given some little amount, and that ended there. If you look at, for example, there is a farmer who has been producing, who found a particular grass in the Rift Valley, and he patented it and is producing the seed, and is saying it is grass, and the grass has been ours for thousands of years. If you go to South Africa, there is this plant that's called Hoodia. It's used among the hunter-gatherers, the Khoisan. So that Hoodia plant, the hunters and the gatherers would eat it. It helps in terms of reducing the hunger pangs. So they would go for many kilometers, and a company from Germany went, picked it, patented it as a product that can be used for women to lose weight because it reduces the hunger pangs. But that was fought off and the patent was removed. And so we need to be very careful about our local species, because many people are looking at to make money from our local plant and animal species.
So I get the impression that we are doing some research at some level, particularly student research, which could very well be used by these organizations.
The biopiracy is happening in such that a company comes from a research institute from outside the country. They identify a master's or a PhD student. The PhD student benefits because they get funding to do their research, but the research is owned by whoever is paying for his PhD research or master's research. That is a major issue that our concern that we have. We have the Biosafety Act that was signed in 2009 and we have some regulations. There's a regulation on labeling, import and export, and the third one I don't remember, but we have the biosafety law in place, and that's what established the National Biosafety Authority. At the regional level, there has been a push for harmonized policies or regulations on GMOs. The reason why that has pushed the harmonization of GMO policies and even seed policy is they have seen that there might be a loophole, and so by harmonization it means if a GMO is approved in Tanzania, then and we're in the East Africa community, then it moves in the East Africa community. Even for the seeds, if it's approved in the COMESA region, or if it's in the ECOWAS region, then it can move. And that's very dangerous because it also removes the sovereignty of a country if you're harmonizing this. So we've raised concern about these harmonized policies for the regional economic blocks or even for Africa, because if Kenya does not want GMOs and Tanzania wants, then there's no way we can sign this harmonized. But they are all discussions around, they have not been signed yet. Many products that are being under research in terms of cross, there's for GMO maize or BT maize, there's even potato research. If you go to ILRI, they're also doing research on animals like a cow that is not affected by the tsetse fly, which causes the trypanosomiasis or nagana. So there's also research going on plants. If you go to the islands in Lake Victoria, there's the GMO mosquito that is being done, so that we have the male, when it mates with the female, they get an infertile or female which cannot, because the female Anopheles mosquito that causes malaria. So there's a lot of research going on. Some of it is quite hidden. It's not very out there. The products are many: maize, cowpea, potato, so many that's going on. But the only approved GMO in Kenya currently is BT cotton. That is with the farmers in the second harvest. And that's very also controversial, because this season when they were growing the crop, there was no seed. The company that supplied them the seed from India did not have seed. I think there were just promises, also economies of scale. I don't think it was adopted by many farmers. In the first season, it was mostly being supplied for free, the seeds. Then in the second season, the farmers expected to buy. At one point, I remember reading about farmers in Yatta saying that we have not gotten the fertilizers and the pesticides. So it was very subsidy dependent. And that is a crisis, because at the end of the day, who's going to pay when you remove the subsidies? Will the farmers be able to produce for a profit? No.
A lot of us do not know what is really going on. So what is it that you have failed in educating people about the dangers for all these foods, or what's the issue? What's the problem? What's the challenge?
I don't think we have failed, but maybe we need to have more voices. But I would say at least many people have heard of GMOs, and they might not understand what it is, but farmers are increasingly getting more aware. We've been doing a lot of sensitization, not only on GMOs, but the toxic pesticides and the effects on their body. And so once farmers get sensitized, and we go on the positive aspect, creating or promoting festivals, seed and food fairs, so that they can see that there's much more out there, then we're able to make an impact. It might not be so much, but a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so we have begun the journey, and we hope to finish the journey stronger as Kenya.
Which are some of the organizations that you are working with to oppose the GMOs?
In Kenya, my organization, the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, which is a membership organization, we have been very keen on that. We have various other organizations in the country, very keen. We have, for example, the Greenpeace Africa, the Kenya Peasants League, and many others who are raising their forces at the regional level. We have the Africa Center for Biodiversity, African Biodiversity Network, and there are many voices out there that have raised a lot of questions.
Do you think the use of jargon, terminologies, hampers the efficacy of communication?
Definitely it does. And the jargon, the communication is really affected. So we really have to ensure that we break it down, even in local languages, for understanding. Mostly my research is more hinged on climate issues, and I want to focus on some of the resilience mechanisms that we are seeing, or practices with the smallholder farmers related to climate change.
Climate change and resilience and carbon credits, again, all these terminologies that are really confusing people. You can imagine credits. I've never in my entire life associated credit with carbon. Credit is it's like a loan, isn't it? It's a benefit to you. There's a lot of confusion around that particular issue. Like you remember, over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of talk about the benefits to the country. In fact, some of us were thinking that once we get these carbon credits, our problem of national debt will be solved, because it sounds like a humongous amount of money. Yeah. So, who is fooling who, if anybody is being fooled at all?
The farmer is being fooled because the amount of money they will get from sequestering the carbon, and it's the companies from the west that are coming and telling them grow trees is good for us, do this, sequester the carbon, do not till the land to release the carbon, but our farmers are smallholder and will pay you. But the chain before it reaches the farmer is very little money, and so that becomes a major challenge on who benefits from the carbon credits. For us, we promote farmers to build their resilience, which is their ability to withstand climate shocks through adaptation and mitigation. But also, some of the practices that are promoted by these companies are very good. Planting of trees to see how to sequester, but you have to create a balance so that the farmer does not lose in terms of economic benefit. Our farmer does not have subsidies like a farmer in the West who can be paid to leave their land fallow for several years. Ours has to produce to be able to pay all their bills, take their children to school. And so that's an issue that we need to build on in terms of supporting the smallholder farmer in Africa.
Do you think that this is a scheme to make sure that Africa does not develop? Because the idea you get when you look at this issue is that we are being told, do not exploit your natural resources and keep them intact, and instead what we will do is pay you for keeping those resources intact. So don't mine your coal, don't do mining, for instance, what we have in Kitui, and instead what we will do is pay you for retaining all those resources underground, whereas we know that industrialization in those countries, and even more recently in the newly industrialized countries, the tigers, has been dependent on natural resources. China still imports a lot of iron ore from all kinds of countries, including Australia. So why can't we? Why are we being told to not to use our resources? Remember, for instance, that there are all these companies that have come to our country and the region, and they have taken up huge chunks of land. And the idea is to sequester those pieces of land so that nobody can gain access to them or use them productively. So we'll have a lot of trees, and I'm not saying trees are bad, trees are very good, but we will not be able to compete. It keeps us in a certain pristine, almost primitive status, isn't it?
It's true. Yeah, that's true.
So is this a scheme?
Yeah, I think it's a scheme. Yeah. A lot of these carbon schemes, and you can see the pushers of the carbon schemes are mostly the foreign companies. Europe wants to continue producing and releasing carbon, or rather greenhouse gases, and tells Africa to remain the way it is as we sequester the carbon. So that's very wrong, because at the end of the day, we need to develop as Africa. So some of those schemes can be good, but we need to produce our minerals to be able to push our economies, and of course use technology. So definitely I'm not for the carbon markets. It does not work, does not really benefit the farmers.